Glue Wednesday. You see, it's my belief that we don't have to get over. We need to find ways to keep it together. And my glue is G-L-U-E. God's love undoes everything. Because that's what keeps it together. That life is about going from one puzzle to the next. You're either a small, medium, or large piece of each puzzle in your family, social, or business relationships. Yet, no matter what size puzzle piece you think you are, without you, the puzzle is labeled as incomplete. Hello, 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 and welcome to Glue Wednesday with Sporty King. I call it Glue Wednesday because so often we tend to hear of Wednesday as where people use the cliche, they say hump day, hump day, hump day, you know. Well, first of all, Wednesday is not necessarily everybody doesn't work Monday to Friday. So Wednesday is not necessarily the day that people need to hump. All right. And see, I think that humps, so I therefore think that hump has the connotation of the need to get over. When in fact, Wednesday is the traditional middle of the week of a 7-day cycle, bringing the beginning of the week and the weekend together. So I see it as the glue rather than the hump. And so we don't need to get over. We need to keep it together. And how better to keep it together than to recognize that glue is G-L-U-E. God's love undoes everything. I always make sure I put the spiritual aspect in anything I do. I've been in my speaking business now 24 years. And I remember when I first started my business, I went to my pastor and I said, I have you can like schedule time to talk. So I had to schedule 30 minutes. And I sat down with him. I said, I'm having a challenge in my speaking business because I'm not sure if I'm supposed to be a speaker or if I have the calling. Because I said there's such a fine line, and every time I speak, it seems like I'm mentioning God or something to that effect. And I said, and the thing is, I don't want to have the calling because I'm not ready to give up sin. Well, he chuckled and he looked at me and he said, "But should the preacher be the only one without sin?" And when he said that, it took the weight off my shoulders. And so, again, sometimes you have to do that. Just self-check, self-check and see what you're going through. And that was one of the glue factors in my life, was recognizing that God, even though I may have thought that I was losing it by not figuring out which side of the fence proverbial fence I wanted to be on, of being a speaker or having a calling to preach. That's not a big problem in a lot of people's lives. Say, wait, that's two good choices. But the fact of the matter is, the harder choices in our lives are when we have to choose from good and good, not from bad and good. It's an easy choice when you have to choose between good and evil. You want to go for good. So the tough choices in our lives do come when the choices are good and good. Because which one is going to get you where you need to go? Because we want to get there faster. Even though we all love that story that we learned in elementary school about the tortoise beating the hare because he was slow and steady. See, there's a whole lot of things in your life if you would just slow down and let them work for you. We've learned so much more than we need, but we've learned enough that we need, and we need to use it. So today my topic is going to be conflict. Just as I had the conflicting feelings about whether or not I want to go to preaching or to be a motivational speaker, our broadcast is going to be about conflict. Now, I Googled the word and was surprised to find several dictionary authorities weren't completely in agreement on the definition for conflict. So, in fact, what I'll do is introduce the summation of that from Wikipedia. And Wikipedia says there is no single universally accepted definition of conflict. One issue of contention is whether the conflict is a situation or a type of behavior. In fact, I'll be working, I said I'm going to be working with some background music this broadcast, but I can't name them yet because other than calling them next door, because they're not paying sponsorship dollars. They sound like a situation right now. So every now and then you hear that clapping? That doesn't mean that I have a live audience card in front telling people to applause. Here in our studio environment, we happen to be next door to someone else who's celebrating themselves. And you know why I bring it up? Because some might say, well, why would you even notice that? Why would you mention that? Because people are celebrating in your life all the time. There's always noise going on in your life. you have to, as I talk about this topic, conflict, part of the remedy, because I don't like to just bring up problems, I like to add some solution. Part of the remedy of dealing with conflict is knowing how to turn the noise off. Recognizing that what we do in our lives every single day is deal with some type of conflict, some type of noise that we may disagree with. Or even if it's something that we want to hear, we've got to shut something else to bring in what we want. Shut something else out to bring in what we want. So think about stuff like that as you go through my broadcasts, as well as you have any conversation with people during the day. Now here's Merriam-Webster's definition, which is the one that I've decided to use. And I think you'll already see that there is an option that is it a situation or is it a type of behavior? 4 different bullets on Merriam's definition. 1, conflict is a struggle for power, property, etc. 2, conflict is a disagreement between ideas, feelings, etc. 3, conflict is a difference that prevents agreement. And 4, conflict is a strong disagreement between people, groups, etc. that results in often angry arguments. And to these bullet points, I would like to add that it's often a search for differences rather than similarities. Conflict, is often a search, for differences rather than similarities. And offer some intentional, because I like to offer some intentional solutions or modes of action to avoid or mitigate conflicts, ultimately lasting effect. I'll first do this by introducing one of my examples of the power of words. And you can play along quickly. I want you to quickly play along with this game with me on camera. I call it audience shout out. And what you're going to do, I usually give 3 words to my audiences, and they have to give me their first reaction as they hear each of the words. So that's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you about a good hot 5-second pause for you to either jot down the word, because that's also a good way to debrief the experience, to jot it down. So get a crayon, and you can jot down the answer, or just say the first word, say it out loud, and especially if you're watching this broadcast with someone, say it out loud so you can see if you both say the same word, or if you say conflicting words. See? So it all comes down, all right? So everybody got their crayon, and by the way, if you don't have a crayon, feel free to use a pen or pencil, but you can also type it in, and if you're watching the broadcast after we already played the game, try not to read other people's answers. Okay, or definitely try not to go fast forward and find out what I said, because there's some learning that can come along with this, all right? So here again, the instructions. I'm going to say the word. I want you to shout out the first word that comes to your mind, or jot it down. And yes, I'm repeating the instructions. Here's why. Let this be a leadership literacy tip for you. We learn through repetition. Take your time and be sure you've clearly communicated your instructions or requests. So that's why you should repeat the instructions. A lot of times we don't. And if you're ever in a situation where you're in the speaking business, or you're speaking to a class or a career day, something like that, when someone asks you a question, repeat the question. Because maybe someone on the other side of the room didn't hear the question, as well as that's going to give you some time to think about and formulate your best answer. So we got a speaking tip for you too. I try to get you as many kinds of tips. We get literacy tips, biblical tips, and that's a professional tip for speaking. So repeat the question. It gives you time to think of your answer, and when you repeat the question, you will have 2 options. You can either parrot or paraphrase. Now, parroting, if you think about it, obviously you know that's a parrot, the animal, the bird. And a parrot says exactly what the other person said. Paraphrase, you would just take the words from the question that somebody asked, and you break it down into what you understood them to be asking, which is also a lot of times more helpful for the other people that didn't hear the question anyway, when you break it down into your words. And because if you get confirmation from the person who asked you the question that your breakdown is proper, then you feel more confident about your answer. And it is about your confidence as a speaker, that you are delivering the right message. So I think out of the 2 options, parroting or paraphrasing, I always go with paraphrasing. And unless it's like a simple question, like for parenting, where it's, what color does it come in? Okay, but if you can break it down into your words, because then you'll be more comfortable and confident that you're giving the right answer. And that confidence comes out in your answer. Okay? All that was a setup to give you a time to get ready to jot down your first thought. Okay? And you're only going to get one. I'm only going to give you one of the three words. I'm going to give you the first of the three words that I usually use in a live audience. So even as you enjoy it, consider bringing me in as a speaker and having a chance to play this game with the audience and see how much they enjoy it. Okay, here we go. So here's the word. Right. Okay, I gave you a hot 5 seconds to jot down what you wanted to do. My observation over the years allows me to bet that the majority of you, when I said right, you either wrote down or you shouted out the word wrong. Did you? And that's like in the number one answer is, okay, the majority of people shout out wrong. And so what do you notice about that? You notice that you're shouting out what you consider the opposite. See, our vocabulary is usually on automatic pilot. And on automatic pilot, a lot of times our vocabulary is negative. So it's not a bad thing to say opposites, but when our opposites are also negative, that's where we tear our lives down. Because, as the Bible says, words are powerful. And the tongue is such a mighty weapon that it can tear you down. So if your words are negative and opposite, you pull people down. If they're opposite but positive, then there's a chance to pull people up. So let's look at that again. Before we go to that, as listed in one of my books called Starting Today, I call it Weekly Affirmations for Daily Living. And one of the principles I have in Starting Today is stating that, number one, so often we forget that the number one communication skill is listening. And your communication is broken down into three percentages. 55% of your communication is how you look, 38% is how you sound, the tone of your voice, and only 7% is are the words. So if we were to go back to the videotape, we see that what I said was right. And when I did that, that means right. So the opposite of right is left, not wrong. So you have to make sure you watch for people's body language, which will be a topic that I'm going to address in a future broadcast. But yeah, the opposite of right is left. And here's how I have it written in the book Starting Today. It says you don't have a right and wrong side. And everything you've done so far in your life has been right based on the information you had to make the decision. As we become comfortable with our decisions, we move forward more confidently toward our success. You're making the right moves. So start to recognize that and see that you continuously make the right moves. And I hope you don't think that I've forgotten that our topic is conflict. And our discovery was that its definitions are based on multiple angles. So the most common word used in all of the definitions was disagreement. And so now you can hear why I wanted to start out with that right versus left or right versus wrong, because disagreement is where we find the word wrong so well camped. Taking a word from three of the bullets mentioned above,